On a bright morning, Miranda Cole tightened her grip on the steering wheel of her sleek Ferrari Portofino, her heart racing, not with the thrill of speed, but with the weight of her next decision. She glanced at the crisp envelope resting on the passenger seat, containing evidence she knew could destroy lives, but also set others free. "Am I ready for this?" she whispered, her pulse quickening. It wasn't fear holding her back. It was the knowledge that once she took this step, there was no going back. As she pulled into the driveway of a pristine office building, the sound of sirens blaring behind her cut through the air like a knife. Miranda turned, her chest tightening as a white police officer approached, his hand resting on his holster. His smirk carried an arrogance she'd seen too many times before, and his first words sent a chill down her spine. "This car doesn't look like it belongs to someone like you." Her mind raced, balancing the frustration bubbling within her and the calm facade she knew she had to maintain. What he didn't know was that she had planned for this exact moment. The wheels were already in motion. With a subtle nod, she reached for her phone, her expression unchanging. "It's time," she said softly into the receiver, her words igniting the first spark of a meticulously crafted plan to expose a corrupt empire. This wasn't just a moment for Miranda. It was a reckoning. The officer's condescending tone, the way his eyes lingered on her as if calculating her worth, and the subtle yet deliberate reach for his badge. Every move screamed of power meant to intimidate. But Miranda wasn't a woman easily shaken. Her heartbeat steadied as she gripped the door handle and stepped out, her tailored blazer catching the morning light. She met his gaze head-on, her voice calm but firm. "Officer, can I help you?" "You can start by explaining why someone like you is driving a car like this," he sneered, the smirk on his face revealing the prejudice buried beneath his words. Miranda felt the familiar surge of anger rise in her chest, but quickly suppressed it. She had dealt with men like this before. But this time she wasn't just reacting. She was ready. She handed over her registration and ID, her movements slow and deliberate, daring him to find a flaw in her actions. The officer, whose name tag read Officer Blake Sanders, scanned the documents with exaggerated skepticism. Shaking his head, he said casually, "Fake papers aren't uncommon these days," tossing them back to her. "How exactly did you afford this car?" Her fingers tightened around the papers, but Miranda didn't flinch. "I worked hard, saved harder, and bought it legally," she said evenly. Then, with a hint of defiance, she added, "If you'd like the receipts, I can provide those too." Blake leaned closer, his smirk widening. "That won't be necessary," he said, stepping toward the car. "We've had reports of stolen vehicles in the area. I'll need to impound this one for further investigation." Miranda's jaw clenched, but she kept her voice steady. "You're overstepping your authority." "Oh, but I can," Blake replied smugly, slipping into the driver's seat. The roar of the engine echoed through the street as he drove off, leaving Miranda standing in the aftermath of his arrogance. The phone in her hand vibrated. She made a call. "He took the bait," she said, her voice as sharp as a blade. "Activate the system." What Blake didn't know was that the car he so gleefully confiscated wasn't just a luxury vehicle. It was a trap. Miranda had installed advanced security protocols capable of remote control. Minutes later, as Blake reveled in the car's interior, the dashboard flashed red. "Unauthorized user detected. Activating override." "What the hell?" Blake muttered, his confidence dissolving into panic. He yanked at the steering wheel, but it locked in place. The car slowed, then turned sharply onto an unfamiliar path. Blake's voice cracked as he yelled into his radio for backup, only to be met with static. For the first time in years, he was utterly powerless. When the car came to a halt in front of a desolate warehouse, Miranda was already waiting. Her sharp heels clicked against the concrete as she approached, her gaze cold and unyielding. "Officer Sanders," she began, her voice calm yet commanding. "Welcome to accountability." Blake's bravado faltered as he stepped out of the car. "What is this?" he barked, his hand instinctively reaching for his holster. But before he could act, a large screen behind Miranda flickered to life, displaying damning footage. Every word, every smug smile, every overreach of his authority, caught on tape. "You've been abusing your badge for years," Miranda said, her voice steady but seething with controlled anger. "But today, that ends. This is all fake," he stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "You're setting me up?" Miranda stepped closer, her eyes piercing. "You think people haven't noticed your behavior? Think again. I'm not the only one who's been watching." The footage shifted to hidden camera clips of Blake's past misdeeds, unprovoked violence, racial profiling, even bribes taken under the guise of authority. The silence in the warehouse was deafening, broken only by Blake's shallow breathing. "You could have been better," Miranda said, her voice now laced with disappointment. "But you chose this, and now you'll face the consequences." As she left the warehouse, her mind was already racing ahead to the next target. She knew Blake was a symptom, not the disease. But this moment wasn't just a victory, it was a spark, a signal that the tides were beginning to turn. The dawn crept over the city, painting the skyline in soft hues of gold and crimson. Miranda stood on the balcony of her safe house, the cool morning air brushing against her face. She gazed at the quiet streets below, her thoughts heavy but resolute. The weight of what she had accomplished, the exposure of Blake Sanders, and the first crack in a web of corruption, settled in her chest. Yet she knew this was only the beginning. For the first time in months, Miranda allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought about her father's unwavering belief in justice and how his ideals had shaped her. But the battle with corruption had taught her a harsh truth. Justice wasn't a given. It had to be fought for relentlessly. And sometimes it meant standing alone in the face of overwhelming darkness. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Laura, her trusted ally. "The evidence has sparked an investigation into the entire network," Laura said, her voice brimming with cautious optimism. "But Miranda, there's chatter. They're already planning their counterattack." Miranda exhaled deeply, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Let them," she said, her voice steady. "They underestimated us once. They won't do it again." She turned back to face the room, where Emily, her younger sister, sat clutching a steaming mug of tea. Miranda's gaze softened as she walked over and placed a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder. "We're not just fighting for justice anymore," she said quietly. "We're fighting for a future where people like you can live without fear." The camera lingered on Miranda's determined face as she looked back out toward the city, the light of a new day glinting in her eyes. Her words echoed softly. "This isn't the end. It's only the first step." If this story has moved you, help us spread the message by hitting like and sharing this story. Let's work together to uncover the truths that matter.